The morning sun rose over the Mesopotamian valley like molten copper, painting the ziggurats, ancient stones, in shades of amber and gold. Zara stood at the edge of her garden, her calloused hands resting on her hips, studying the rows of barley that stretched toward the horizon. Something felt wrong. The air tasted metallic, like the moment before lightning strikes. She knelt beside a wheat stalk, pressing her palm against the soil. The earth hummed beneath her fingers, a language without words that she'd understood since childhood. But today, the hum felt discordant, like an instrument desperately out of tune. "What are you trying to tell me?" she whispered. The wheat stalk trembled, though no wind blew. Then, before her eyes, a streak of pale yellow crawled up the stem like a scar. Within seconds, the healthy green had faded to the color of old parchment. Zara jerked her hand back, her heart hammering against her ribs. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not 3 days before the harvest festival. The city of Eridu had stood for 5 centuries, built by hands both human and decidedly not. The Luminari had designed the water channels that never ran dry, their bodies of living light mapping underground springs invisible to human eyes. The Stonarii had quarried the foundation stones, their granite-like forms capable of carrying loads that would have crushed 10 men. And the Aerith, those whispers made flesh, had woven weather patterns that ensured perfect growing seasons year after year. Zara had grown up in this tapestry of cooperation, never knowing a world where humans stood alone. Her earliest memory was of Kale, a young Luminari navigator, teaching her to read the stars while perched on the ziggurat's highest terrace. He'd traced constellations with fingers that left trails of soft blue luminescence in the night air. Now she ran through the narrow streets toward the market square, her bare feet slapping against sun-warmed stones. Merchants were setting up stalls for the pre-festival market, humans arranging pottery, Luminari hanging crystalline wind chimes that sang in frequencies that made the soul ache. Stonarii displaying jewelry carved from meteoric iron. But everywhere Zara looked, she saw yellow. Yellow streaking through grain bundles, yellow creeping up vegetable stalks, yellow spreading like a plague across the flower garlands that should have been vibrant purple and red. "Zara!" Throck's voice rumbled like distant thunder. The massive Stonarii stood near the fountain, his rocky features etched with concern. Fragments of quartz embedded in his shoulders caught the sunlight, scattering rainbow fragments across the cobblestones. "Your garden too?" She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. A shimmer in the air announced Whisper's arrival. The Aerith materialized like morning mist, gaining sudden substance, their translucent form barely distinguishing them from the atmosphere itself. When they spoke, their voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. 3 districts report the same contamination. The council has been summoned." The council hall occupied the ziggurat's second level, a circular chamber where representatives from each species gathered to settle disputes and plan celebrations. Today, the atmosphere crackled with tension thick enough to choke on. Elder Namu, her white hair bound in traditional braids, stood at the chamber's center. Around her, council members argued in a dozen different languages and tones. Human speech, Luminari harmonics that made the air vibrate, Stonarii rumbles that resonated in the bones, and Aerith whispers that bypassed ears entirely and spoke directly to the mind. "Order!" Namu's staff struck the floor, and silence rippled outward. "We gain nothing from panic." Kale drifted forward, his luminous form pulsing with agitation.
Unlike most Luminari, who maintained a steady golden glow, Kale's light shifted with his emotions, now flickering between worried orange and fearful violet. This isn't isolated to Eridu. I've received transmissions from the orbital station. Every agricultural world in the network reports identical symptoms. Grain, vegetables, fruit, all turning yellow and withering. A Stonarii elder named Grath spoke, his words grinding like stones in a landslide. In my grandfather's grandfather's time, there were stories. They called it the Star Blight. It consumed crops across 100 worlds before the ancients found a cure. The Birinchi Uruglar, Whisper murmured, and despite their ethereal nature, everyone heard the reverence in that whisper. The first seeds. Namu's weathered face grew even graver. I know this tale. It's written in the oldest texts, the ones we preserved from before the Great Unification. But I always believed it to be metaphor, not literal truth. What does the legend say? Zara found herself speaking, surprised by the sound of her own voice in this assembly of elders and leaders. All eyes and light patterns and ambient awareness turned to her. Namu studied the young woman for a long moment. Come forward, child. Zara's legs felt like water as she stepped into the circle. You have the gift of green speech, Namu said. It wasn't a question. You hear what plants say. Yes, elder. Then perhaps you should be the one to seek the first seeds. Namu turned to address the entire council. The legend tells of a place beyond our network of worlds, accessible only through the ancient portal beneath this very ziggurat. There, in a vault untouched by time, grow the first seeds, plants from which all cultivated crops descend. They contain the original genetic patterns, uncorrupted by generations of selective breeding. The legend claims they hold the cure to any agricultural plague. Throck shifted his massive weight, causing small tremors in the floor. The portal hasn't been opened in 500 years. We don't even know if it still functions. We know where it is, Graf countered. My people helped seal it after the unification. We have the knowledge to unseal it. But the cost, Whisper interjected, their form rippling with distress. The old texts are clear. Opening the portal requires balance. A sacrifice from each species. The chamber fell silent. Namu straightened, though the movement clearly pained her ancient bones. Then we must be willing to pay it. Zara, are you prepared to enter the unknown? Zara thought of her garden, of the wheat turning to dust. She thought of children, human, Luminari, Stonarii and Aerith alike, who might face starvation if crops failed across all worlds. She thought of 500 years of peace that had allowed different species to become not just allies, but family. I'll go, but I can't do it alone. Kale's light flared bright blue. I'll navigate. No one knows star paths better than the Luminari. I will provide strength, rumbled Throck. Where brute force is needed, call upon Stonarii endurance. And I shall be wind and warning, moving where solid forms cannot, Whisper coalesced more solidly than usual, almost achieving full opacity. Namu smiled, though tears glinted in her eyes. Then it is decided. You leave at dawn, and may whatever gods watch over this strange family of ours guide your path.
The sublevels of the ziggurats smelled of earth and time. Zara descended worn stairs behind Grath, whose massive form barely fit through passages carved for his ancestors. Kale floated beside her, his light the only illumination in the deepening darkness. Throck followed, and Whisper drifted through the very walls, scouting ahead. Here,
Grath stopped before a wall that looked identical to every other wall they'd passed. He placed both massive hands against the stone and pushed. Muscles of living rock flexed beneath his granite-like skin, and with a groan that might have been the Stonarii or the stone itself, a section of wall swung inward. Beyond lay a chamber that took Zara's breath away. The portal occupied the room's center, a perfect circle of liquid silver suspended vertically in the air, held in place by nothing visible. Around its circumference, ancient symbols glowed faintly, recognizable as proto-writing from all 4 species. Before the unification, each of our peoples came through this portal from our dying worlds, Grath explained. This planet, this valley, was neutral ground. We were refugees, all of us. We learned to share, or we would have perished. Zara had heard the histories, of course, but standing before this artifact of desperation and hope made them viscerally real. What's the price for opening it? Grath gestured to 4 small alcoves carved into the walls, one at each cardinal direction. In each alcove rested a crystalline bowl. Blood. Not much, a few drops from each species. The portal responds to genetic signatures. It will recognize representatives of those who first used it and grant passage. Kale dimmed slightly. There's a reason we sealed this way. The worlds beyond, some were hostile. Others were simply wrong for life as we understand it. Opening this portal opens doors to places we might not want rediscovered. Do we have a choice? Whisper's voice carried a sad certainty. They didn't. One by one they approached the alcoves. Zara pricked her finger on the ceremonial blade Grath provided, letting crimson drops fall into the southern bowl. Kael extended a finger of light into the eastern bowl, where it touched, golden droplets condensed like liquid sunshine. Throck scraped mineral dust from his shoulder into the western bowl, what passed for blood in a silicon-based organism. And Whisper condensed moisture from the air itself into the northern bowl, their essence given temporary physical form. The symbols around the portal flared brilliant white. The liquid silver surface rippled, then cleared, revealing not a room beyond, but a landscape of impossible crystalline formations beneath a sky that cycled through colors no human language had names for. "Well," Kael said, his light pulsing with false bravado, "at least it'll be interesting." Zara managed a shaky laugh. "That's one word for it." Throck stepped forward first, his massive form disappearing into the portal as if passing through a waterfall. Whisper followed, dissipating and reforming on the other side. Kael drifted through, his light momentarily eclipsed. Zara took a deep breath, touched the small pouch at her belt where she had placed a handful of soil from her garden, and stepped through. The sensation defied description. For an instant, or an eternity, she existed everywhere and nowhere, stretched across impossible distances, compressed into a singular point. She felt the universe breathing, felt the pulse of distant stars, felt the weight of existence itself. Then her feet touched solid ground, and she staggered, gasping. "Everyone intact?" Kael's light had dimmed to a worried orange. "Define intact," Whisper murmured, their form flickering like a candle in wind. The world they'd entered was wrong in subtle ways that made Zara's head ache. The ground beneath their feet looked like soil, but felt springy, almost bouncy. The crystalline trees hummed at a frequency just below hearing, creating a constant pressure in her skull. And the sky, that terrible, beautiful sky, cycled through its incomprehensible color spectrum every few seconds. "Well, the first seeds are supposed to be in a vault," Throck said, scanning the alien landscape. "I see no structure." "There!" Kael pointed toward what Zara had initially mistaken for a natural formation, a hill or outcropping. But as her eyes adjusted to the strange light, she saw geometric precision in the angles, deliberate architecture in what she had assumed was random geology.
They walked. Or rather, Zara and Throck walked, while Kale drifted and Whisper flowed. The crystalline forest pressed close on either side, and Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The formation seemed to lean inward, tracking their movement. "These aren't just plants," she said suddenly. "They're aware. Not intelligent, exactly, but aware. Like the way a sunflower tracks the sun, but more complex." "Charming," Kale muttered. "Sentient trees. Just what I needed today." A low growl stopped them all in their tracks. From between two crystalline trunks emerged a creature that made Zara's mind rebel at the sight of it. It had too many legs, or not enough. Its head occupied the wrong position on its body. When it opened what might have been a mouth, the appendages inside defied both biological logic and sanity. "Nobody move," Whisper whispered, condensing into their most solid form and positioning themselves between the creature and Zara. "It might be territorial. If we—" The creature lunged. Throck moved with surprising speed for something his size, interposing his rocky bulk. The creature's attack, claws, tentacles, something worse, struck the Stonari's chest with a sound like hammers on anvils. Throck grunted but held firm. Kale flared brilliant white, his light suddenly hot enough that Zara felt her skin prickle. The creature recoiled, shrieking in a pitch that made her ears bleed. "The structure!" Kale shouted over the creature's screams. "Run!" They ran. Zara's human legs pumped frantically, while Throck thundered beside her. Kale shot ahead like a comet, and Whisper simply vanished and reappeared closer to their goal with each pulse. The entrance to the structure yawned before them, a perfect square of absolute darkness. Zara didn't slow down. She plunged into the black, trusting her companions to follow. The darkness swallowed her completely. Then, gradually, light returned. Not natural light, but a soft blue-green glow emanating from the walls themselves. They stood in a corridor that stretched impossibly far, lined with alcoves containing things, objects that might have been tools or art or something with no human equivalent. "Is everyone here?" Throck confirmed, checking his chest where the creature had struck. Deep gouges marred his rocky exterior, but already mineral deposits were beginning to fill them. "It will heal." Kale's light flared erratically. "I've never encountered a species like that in any catalog. This world is older than our network, older than the unification. These might be the ruins of whoever built the portals in the first place. Then they might also have left guardians. We should proceed carefully." They moved deeper into the structure. The corridor branched and branched again, creating a labyrinth of passages. But each time they faced a choice, Zara felt a pull, like her gift of green speech, but stronger, more insistent. Something here called to her. "This way," she said, trusting the feeling. The others followed without question. The corridor finally opened into a vast chamber. At its center stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal sat a simple clay pot. Inside the pot, illuminated by some internal light source, grew 7 seeds. Each was a different color: red, gold, green, blue, silver, black, and white. "The first seeds," Kale breathed, his light flaring with excitement. Zara approached slowly, reverently. As she drew closer, the pull intensified. She could feel the life in those seeds, ancient and patient, waiting across millennia for someone to find them. She reached out. "Stop!" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, reminiscent of Whisper, but infinitely more vast. The very air seemed to speak.
A form materialized before the pedestal. It resembled a luminari, but constructed of pure crystalline light rather than organic luminescence. Its features were androgynous, ageless, and utterly inhuman despite the familiar shape. "Who are you?" KL demanded, his light flickering between aggressive red and cautious yellow. "I am Guardian. I am Watcher. I am the last echo of those who came before." The crystalline being regarded them with eyes that held galaxies. "You seek the first seeds to cure your plague." "Yes," Zara said. "Our worlds are dying. The crops are failing." "Your worlds are not dying," Guardian corrected, its voice like wind chimes in distant thunder. "They are correcting. Tell me, child of soil, when did your people last take only what they needed? When did any of you pause to ask permission before reshaping continents, before emptying aquifers, before burning forests for fields?" Zara opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. She thought of Eridu's expansion over 5 centuries, thought of new fields carved from wilderness every generation, thought of rivers redirected, mountains hollowed from minerals, entire ecosystems displaced to feed the growing population. We've always been respectful," she tried. "Have you?" Guardian swept an arm toward the chamber's walls. Images appeared in the crystalline surface, scenes from hundreds of worlds, forests reduced to stumps, oceans choked with pollution, atmosphere thick with toxic clouds. This is respect? This is balance? The first seeds were never meant to solve the Star Blight. They are not a cure. "Then what are they?" Throck rumbled. "They are memory, pattern, the original template for growth in harmony with planetary systems. The blight is not a disease, it is a defense mechanism. When civilizations take too much, too fast, their worlds respond. The yellowing, the withering. This is the planet pulling back its generosity, forcing inhabitants to reconsider their relationship with the soil that sustains them." The implications crashed over Zara like a wave. "You're saying we caused this, all of us, together, by taking too much?" "Yes." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Whispers' form flickered with distress. "Then how do we fix it? If the seeds aren't a cure, what do we do?" "You pass the trials," Guardian said simply. "Each of you faces what you fear most. If you survive, with understanding intact, you may take the seeds, not as cure, but as teachers. They will show you how to grow in balance again, how to listen to what your worlds need, how to give back rather than only take." "And if we fail the trials?" KL asked. Guardian's expression didn't change, but something in the chamber's atmosphere grew colder. "Then you remain here, and your people learn through starvation what they refuse to learn through wisdom." "That's not a choice," Zara protested. "Isn't it? You chose every day to expand without asking. You chose to treat worlds as resources rather than partners. You chose convenience over sustainability. Now you face the consequences of those choices." Guardian raised her hand. "But I am not without mercy. The trials will be harsh, but not impossible. Face your deepest fears, and you may yet save your people." The chamber began to shift and change around them. "Wait!" Throck called out. "Can't we face them together?" "No," Guardian said, and its voice was fading. "Some truths can only be learned alone." The world dissolved. Zara stood in her garden. It looked exactly as it had that morning, rows of healthy barley, wheat nodding in a gentle breeze, vegetables thriving in neat beds. Her hands were clean, not soil-stained. The sun felt warm on her face. "Hello, little one." She turned. Her mother stood beside the well, exactly as Zara remembered her from childhood, before the illness, before the wasting away, before the funeral pyre. Her mother smiled, and Zara's heart broke anew. "Mother, I'm so proud of you, growing such a beautiful garden. You have the gift, just like I did, like my mother before me." Zara wanted to run to her, to embrace her, to never let go. But something felt wrong. The garden was too perfect, the air too still. And her mother's eyes, they didn't quite track movement correctly, like a puppet whose strings weren't pulled with enough skill. "You are not real. You are the trial." Her mother's smile didn't waver. "Does it matter? I'm here now. You could stay here. Perfect garden, perfect day. No blight, no dying worlds, no impossible responsibility. Just you and me and the soil." Temptation wrapped around Zara like honey. How easy it would be to accept this lie, to stay in this pocket of false peace while her friends faced their own trials alone. But she thought of Kale's light, Throck's steadfast loyalty, Whisper's gentle wisdom. She thought of the children in Eridu streets. She thought of 500 years of cooperation that had built something beautiful. "It matters," Zara said, "because real things, real people, are messy and difficult, and they end. My mother died. That was real. That was true. And I honor her memory by living in the real world, not by hiding in a perfect lie." The garden flickered like a candle flame. "What are you really trying to show me?" Zara asked the illusion of her mother. "What's my real fear?" Her mother's form began to shift. The features blurred, reformed into something older, wilder. When she spoke again, it was with the voice of soil itself, of roots and worms and decay. "You fear being alone," the voice said. "You fear that without your gift, without your connection to growing things, you are nothing. You fear that your friends follow you not from loyalty, but from necessity. You fear that when this crisis ends, you will return to being just another human in a city of wonders, unremarkable and forgotten." Zara's throat tightened, because it was true. She had always felt it, the weight of ordinariness in a world where your neighbors could glow like stars or move mountains or become the wind itself. "Yes," she admitted, "I'm afraid of being forgotten." The garden dissolved entirely, leaving her standing in a void. "But," she continued, voice strengthening, "being afraid doesn't make me weak. Being ordinary doesn't make me worthless. I don't need to be special to matter. I matter because I care. I matter because I try. I matter because when my world needs someone to step forward, I do, even when I'm terrified." Light bloomed around her. Not external light, but something emanating from within her own chest. "You understand," Guardian's voice echoed through the void. "Worth is not inherent. It is built through actions, through choices, through kindness given freely even when no one watches. You have passed." The void shattered like glass. Kale found himself in absolute darkness. This was not the comfortable darkness of a clouded night. This was the primordial dark that existed before stars, the void between galaxies, the negation of all light. For a Luminari, whose very existence was photonic, this was death. He tried to glow.
Nothing. He tried to see. Nothing. He tried to sense even the faintest electromagnetic radiation. Nothing. Panic clawed at him with frozen talons. A luminari without light was like a human without oxygen, a fish without water. Impossible. Unbearable. "Please," he whimpered into the dark. "Please, I need light. I am light. Without it, I'm—" "You are what?" Guardian's voice asked from the darkness. "Without your glow, without your ability to navigate by starlight, without the thing that makes you distinctly Luminari, who are you, Kale?" "I don't know." The admission tore from him like a scream. "That is your fear. Not darkness itself, but what darkness represents, the loss of identity. You have defined yourself by your abilities for so long that you've forgotten the self beneath the light." Kale wanted to argue, to fight back, but in this absolute darkness, stripped of everything that made him feel powerful and unique, he couldn't deny the truth. He'd spent centuries being the navigator, the star reader, the one who could go where others couldn't. Remove those abilities, and who remained? Slowly, carefully, Kale reached inward, past the desperate need to glow, past the identity built on utility and skill, down to something he'd ignored for so long he'd almost forgotten it existed. His name, his actual name, before he'd learned to navigate. His core self, the consciousness that existed independent of form or function. In the absolute dark, Kale found something surprising. Peace. "I am Kale," he said quietly. "Not Kale the navigator, not Kale the luminari. Just Kale. A being who thinks and feels and chooses to help others because connection matters more than capability. I would still be me even if I never glowed again." The darkness lifted like a curtain. Throck stood at the edge of an abyss. Below him stretched an infinite fall into darkness. Behind him, his people, all the Stonarii he had ever known, stood watching with expressions of disappointment and disgust. "Weak," rumbled his father's voice. "You always were. Too soft, too willing to bend." "Stone does not bend," added his mentor. "Stone endures. But you let these others convince you that cooperation is strength. You have betrayed everything it means to be Stonarii." Throck's massive hands clenched into fists. This was his nightmare. Not physical pain, but rejection by his people. Being told he was wrong for embracing peace, for valuing friendship with those unlike him. "You're not real," Throck said, but his voice cracked. "Does it matter?" his father asked. "These thoughts exist in your own mind. You fear that by choosing gentleness you've betrayed your strength. You fear that true Stonarii would never accept what you've become." Throck looked down at his hands, hands that had crushed boulders, but had also carefully constructed homes, woven jewelry from meteor iron, and held a frightened child with infinite tenderness. "Maybe I have betrayed traditional Stonarii values," Throck said slowly. "Maybe my ancestors would see me as weak, but I've seen what pure strength without compassion creates. Empires built on suffering, fortresses that house only loneliness. I choose to be both strong and gentle. If that makes me unworthy of being Stonarii, then perhaps it's time for what Stonarii means to change." The illusion of his father stepped closer. "And if you're wrong, if gentleness is truly weakness, then I will be wrong and weak together with friends who value me anyway. I would rather be a kind failure than a cruel success." The abyss sealed itself. The judging crowd dissolved like morning mist.
Whisper found themselves in a room full of mirrors, but the reflections showed nothing. Each mirror was empty, revealing only the space behind where Whisper floated. No form, no presence, no evidence of existence. "Do you see?" Guardian's voice asked. "This is what you fear most, not death, but irrelevance. To be so ephemeral that when you pass from this world, no one notices. To exist so lightly that you leave no mark, no legacy, no proof you were ever here." Whisper's form, already tenuous, began to dissipate further. I barely exist. We Aerith are wind-given thought. What do we leave behind? Humans build monuments. Luminari record star paths. Stonarii carve mountains. What do we leave? "You leave the spaces between," Guardian said. "You leave the breath of change, the whisper of possibility. You think permanence is the only form of value, but you are wrong. A kind word spoken once and never recorded can change a life. A moment of comfort given freely and forgotten can save a soul. You exist in the now, and there is profound beauty in that." Whisper looked again at the empty mirrors. This time they saw not absence, but freedom. Unburdened by the need to last forever, they could be fully present in each moment. "I am Whisper," they said, their voice growing stronger. "I am the breath between words, the pause between heartbeats. I am temporary, and that makes every moment precious. I don't need to last forever to matter now." The mirrors shattered into silver dust that danced in non-existent wind. The four companions reappeared in the central chamber simultaneously. They stared at each other, still raw from their ordeals, still processing what they'd learned. Guardian stood before the pedestal, the first seeds still resting in their clay pot. "You have each faced truth and survived. You may now take the seeds, but remember, they are not a cure, they are teachers. Plant them in soil mixed from all your worlds. Let them grow. Learn from them the patterns of sustainable harvest, of giving back as much as you take, of listening to the land instead of commanding it." Zara approached the pedestal. Her hand trembled as she lifted the pot. The seeds hummed with life, and she felt their knowledge pressing against her consciousness. Centuries of growth patterns, symbiotic relationships between soil and plant, the delicate dance of take and give that maintained balance. "Thank you," she said to Guardian. The crystalline being inclined its head. "Do not thank me. Prove worthy of this gift by teaching others. Your worlds have been given a second chance. Do not waste it." The chamber began to fade. They emerged from the portal back in the ziggurat's depths to find Elder Namu waiting, along with most of the council. 3 days had passed topside, though for the 4 travelers it had felt like hours. "The blight worsens," Namu said without preamble. 50% of crops have failed completely. We have perhaps a month before widespread famine begins. Zara held up the pot. "We have the seeds, but they won't fix anything by themselves." She explained Guardian's message, explained about the trials, explained that the blight wasn't a plague, but a warning,
a planetary correction against imbalance. The council chamber fell silent. Finally, Groth spoke, his gravelly voice softer than usual. Then we must change, not just how we farm, but how we think, how we live, how we take from the worlds that sustain us. The Harvest Festival, Kale said suddenly, his light flaring bright yellow with realization. We can use it, not to celebrate taking from the land, but to pledge giving back. A new kind of harvest, where we plant twice what we take, where we restore as much as we consume. Elder Namu smiled. The last harvest festival, then, the end of one way of living and the beginning of another.
3 days later, the valley filled with people, human, Luminari, Stonarii, and Aerith. But instead of celebration, they came with tools. Instead of feasting, they came ready to work. In the center of the gathering, Zara knelt beside 7 planting beds prepared with soil from all 4 homeworlds, carefully mixed. One by one, she planted the first seeds. As each touched earth, it pulsed with light, red, gold, green, blue, silver, black, and white. Around her, thousands worked. Humans tore up excessive fields, leaving strips for wildlife. Luminari reprogrammed atmospheric processors to restore weather patterns rather than optimize them. Stonarii filled in excessive quarries, letting mountains heal. Aerith dispersed across the network of worlds, spreading the message of balance. The seeds sprouted within hours. Within days they had grown into mature plants, and their pollen spread on the wind. Not just physical pollen, but information encoded at the genetic level. Every crop plant it touched began to change, rewriting its own genetic code to be more efficient, more symbiotic, requiring less from the soil while giving more back. The yellow began to fade. Within 2 weeks, fields returned to green. Within a month, yields were better than before. Not because they'd planted more, but because they'd learned to plant smarter, in cooperation with the land, rather than in opposition to it. The last harvest festival became the first balance festival. Every year afterward, the 4 species gathered not to celebrate taking, but to assess balance, to measure what they'd restored, what they'd protected, what they'd learned. And in a small garden on the ziggurat's 3rd terrace, Zara tended the 7 original plants, keeping them alive as living reminders of how close they'd come to disaster and how far they'd traveled toward wisdom. Kael often joined her there, his light no longer flickering with anxiety, but glowing steady and confident. Throck would visit, bringing gifts of carefully ethically sourced minerals. And Whisper drifted through regularly, their presence a gentle reminder that some things need not be permanent to be precious. They had learned to harvest wisely. They had learned to give back generously. They had learned that being different species didn't matter nearly as much as being one family. And the universe, vast and patient, watched as one tiny planet learned to dance the ancient dance of balance, adding their small voice to the harmony of worlds that lived sustainably among the stars. Years later, when asked about that time, Zara would smile and touch the soil of her garden, soil that was black and gold and crystalline and gossamer in equal measure, perfectly balanced. We were so afraid of the ending, we didn't realize we were actually witnessing a beginning. The last harvest festival wasn't an ending at all. It was the day we finally started living in harmony with the worlds that sustain us.
and in the night sky above Eridu, stars shone down on a civilization that had learned the hardest lesson any species must face, that to survive you must first learn to belong, not as conquerors or colonizers, but as children of the soil, partners with the land, stewards of the delicate balance that makes life possible. The harvest would continue.